Hey, welcome back to another edition of Balkanomnicon. I'm Jasmin Mujanović. This week, I speak with Kenan Efendić. Kenan is the editor-in-chief of Odgovor.ba, and Odgovor.ba, in turn, is the chief backer and host of this podcast, Balkanomnicon. So as you can see, already within the first few episodes of this podcast, you're getting a sense of what corruption in the Balkans looks like. It's one hand washing the other. I do you a favor, you do me a favor, off we go. If you laughed at that idiotic joke, you should feel bad about yourself, because it's a stereotype, and we don't do ethnic stereotypes on this podcast. That's the intro. That's the intro. Can you believe that that's the intro? That's the intro that I ran with for this podcast? Unbelievable. Kenan is a terrific human being, all kidding aside. He has had a long time career in the Bosnian-Herzegovinian publishing industry and media industries. He's also had a very distinguished career working with a number of the leading international organizations in the Western Balkans and Bosnia-Herzegovina, the World Bank, the EU, so on and so forth. So I thought, as I told you in that kind of mini intro episode for Balkanomnicon, that Kenan would be a really terrific person for us to feature on this platform on a regular basis, just so that he and I can have a kind of regular check-in. What are some major regional issues? How do we see them? How do we see them developing? What can we anticipate in the months to come? And so on. This first conversation, I have to say, did have a, shall we say, disproportionate Bosnian focus, although in some ways it was a quite philosophical conversation. I hope that will be of interest to you. We do end up talking about Slovenia a little bit. We end up talking about some broader illiberal trends towards the end of our conversation. That conversation, as I said, is going to continue. It's going to develop. This is also an opportunity for you to get involved. You can contact me via the platform formerly known as Twitter. I refuse to use the new name. You can contact me over there. You can contact me via email. You can give a shout out to Odgovor on their socials. Tell us what you want to hear. The next few conversations are in the process of being recorded. I think they're pretty interesting. I hope they will be interesting to you as well. That having been said, one final point from my end before we turn it over to Kenan. Thank you guys so much for listening. We've only really put out like an episode and a half so far, and the outpouring has really been significant. It's really been very, very encouraging. Clearly, the concept resonates with you guys, and that feels very empowering for me. I think it's very encouraging for the colleagues at Odgovor, which is also a very young platform, only started in September of last year. So thank you very, very much. Do keep listening if that is something you would like to do. I would like to say subscribe. I'm not even sure how one does that. It's something I've heard the kids say. I believe there's a button. If you find the button, tell me about it. I would also like to find the button. But certainly do share it among your friends and colleagues. And thank you for the support. I'm going to stop talking because I've promised I don't want to talk too much on these episodes. Up next, Kenan Efendić. And in a few weeks, a few more conversations from our end. Thank you very much. All right, folks, I am here, as I said, with Kenan Efendić. Kenan Efendić is hopefully going to be joining me on a fairly regular basis. That is the agreement that we've come to, Kenan. But depending on how well this conversation goes, maybe we'll have to stop that agreement. Kenan Efendić is the editor-in-chief of Odgovor.ba, and Odgovor.ba is the website that is the chief host and backer of this podcast, so I am very grateful for Kenan's support in that regard. He's also somebody who I have worked with over the years in the context of the translation of my book, The Bosniaks, because Kenan is also a long-time entity, a long-time figure in the BIH journalism and publishing industries. So Kenan, welcome first and foremost to the program. It's very good to have you. My kind of first question for you right off the bat really is, because I was looking at your biography today. You have this kind of incredible biography, actually. I mean, you worked for the World Bank for many years. You worked in the publishing industry for many years. You have, I think, a really interesting sense of what it's like to work in the media and publishing space in Bosnia, in the Balkans. Can you tell us a little bit how you got involved in that space in the first place?
Yeah, hi Jasmin, and thank you for having me on this podcast. And I'm really happy that we started this jointly, you and Odgovor.ba. My role is like, I feel that way, like to be some kind of local voice, which reminds me of all of these often peculiar and weird situations when foreigners come here and they want to hear locals. So I'm gonna try to avoid this like type position of a local Bosnian who is going to explain Bosnia and the world to foreigners. Maybe sometimes my perspective is gonna be unusual. I don't know. I'm gonna speak what I believe in with my best efforts. So I've been across both sides of the media landscape in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I studied Bosnian literature and Bosnian, Serbian, Croatian language. That's what my grade says formally. So I have 3 languages starting with. So my first job actually was working, it wasn't actually a job, it was some kind of internship with the Naša Stranka, our party. Sometimes people get that, they dig that and tell me like, oh, you have been with Naša Stranka and now you are kind of conservative centrist, or I don't know what, Bosniak intellectual editor / something like that. So that was back in 2008. I was a young, ambitious, and full of energy student of literature, and I saw Naša Stranka, meaning our party, as something totally new and different that's worth of politically engaging, like thousands of other people in Bosnia and Herzegovina. As far as I can recall, there is only, I believe, 3 to 5 people at the top levels from this initial group of Naša Stranka. So they transformed. Eventually, I started working with the Radio Sarajevo website. I've been chief editor of Radio Sarajevo website, and it was an interesting time. It was 2010, and these have been the first elections in Bosnia that political parties realized the potential of online media. So it was very exciting. It was very interesting to see how they are changing their perspective. And I can remember that some very well established columnists were reluctant to write for news sites. So actually it was 15 years ago, and a lot of has changed. Then I started working with in anti-corruption, actually in investigative reporting with OCCRP, which is now a huge international network. They are doing a great job. But they've been, back then in 2013, they've been a small Sarajevo-based nest for future investigative collaboration across the world. Then I started with their local branch, Center for Investigative Reporting. And like many other ordinary guys in journalism, I got tired of journalism. So I decided, to try something else. But being stuck in journalism and having a degree in skills in writing, actually understanding, there is only another like industry you can thrive in, or try to thrive in, which is public relations, strategic communications, stuff like that. So I've spent some time with the Office of the Special Representative of the EU in Bosnia and Herzegovina. You had some really mean tweets about my tweets back then, not knowing that I've been tweeting on behalf. You were so
now it all comes out.
Yeah, you were so anti-EU back then in 2018, I believe. Yeah, probably you are still anti-EU.
I'm not anti-EU. I'm sort of...
Yeah, but I'm now anti-EU.
So I was right. No, I'm just a disillusioned Europhile. I think that's what I am.
Yeah, same here. Then I spent some really nice years as a consultant with the World Bank office here in Bosnia and Herzegovina. World Bank is really a huge international system where you can meet really knowledgeable and nice people. And I had this opportunity and honor to work with some really experienced editors based in DC or Vienna, and like working on both sides of this perception industry, because I believe media and public relations are actually a perception industry. It helped me to get like a full perspective on how to say things, how to not say things, how to say nothing, how to be mean when you want to say something, how to be polite, and so on. But eventually I realized, when working in publishing industry, where we actually met more, and we've been working on Bosnian translation of your book, The Bosniaks, Nationhood After Genocide. So I realized that I'm this type of guy, like you, like many others. I want to be involved in public affairs. And living in Bosnia and belonging to a generation that doesn't remember pre-war country, I had like 6 years when the war started, like the war, the after war, and all these decades of, is it gonna be a new war? That's my whole life. So you really want to get involved somehow. But actually then I got mingled and met I met a lot of people along these years, and we've all been like meeting officially in a friendly environment, discussing what to do, because no one belongs to a political party. I believe that political parties in Bosnia and Herzegovina are totally overrated in sense of intellectual ideological production. Those are basically very narrow organizations. Of course, a lot of people is saying that this project belongs to a certain political party, the biggest Bosniak party, SDA. I would be very happy if they are on such a level to recognize people like me and people better than me and give them money to make something. No, they are not doing that. They are not doing that, unfortunately. And they haven't been doing that for at least 30 years. And some of the things we are experiencing today, like with lobbying, with narrative issues on Bosnia and Bosniaks, this is actually the effect of their not working on these issues. So I met a lot of people in media, in civil society, a lot of authors, editors, and also some of the people that are interested in public affairs, but that have businesses as well. So it was kind of organic meeting of people that are thinking wider than their private or professional lives, who are interested in their country, in their society, and who believe that they can influence somehow, or that they at least can try to do something. And some of these people have financial means to fund a media enterprise. So thank God we met, and this is Odgovor, which means in Bosnian both response, reply, and answer. So we sometimes play with that when someone is not answering us and we are looking for answers. But yeah.
So I'm interested in that. So you brought us to exactly the question that I kind of wanted to ask, and I'm going to tell you this is not one of the questions I told you I was going to ask, so I will surprise you. But I was kind of listening to you describe your own biography, and I'm familiar with aspects of it, and I'm listening to your own narrative, not just of your, shall we say, professional transformation, but also, I think, as you very eloquently put it, this kind of intellectual, ideological space that exists that you're trying to fill, but is also very empty right now in Bosnia, and perhaps the region as a whole. And so I want to ask you, what is, and this is a huge question, but like, what is the reason for that emptiness? Does this, and you told me that this was like your third podcast today or something. So like, is it a crisis of literacy? Is it an intellectual crisis? Is it a just kind of general societal depression? I mean, people talk about Bosnians and people in the Balkans as supposedly being apathetic. I don't really think that's true. People are obsessed with politics, but their ability to affect change, right? To actually like change their circumstances in the political sphere, that seems to be very limited. So how do you think of like what is the problem here?
Like let's put all these reasons you mentioned, which are totally legitimate and real, aside. I believe there is one huge, deep structural reason why these spaces have been empty or seem to be empty, because they've been filled with ideas and projects that didn't resonate organically within Bosnian or / Bosniak public. Some of the people listening to us may know that, but many maybe do not. There has been and still is a heavy, robust international financing of civil society and media in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Like, maybe comparing the size of the country, it's maybe one of the biggest scales, not only from the US, but also from the European Union and EU member states, especially Scandinavian states, and the United Kingdom. So we still really have a lot of totally professional newsrooms, especially dealing with investigative reporting and war crime reporting, transitional justice, and so on. And I've been affiliated with some of these outlets, and working in these outlets, it's really kind of peak professional conditions you can get in Bosnia and Herzegovina. There has also been a lot of private foreign initiative in media landscape of Bosnia, like Al Jazeera Balkans, that was a really huge, robust regional program that unfortunately has been shut down before all these Gulf wars. It's not related to that, but let's not dive into that. And I believe that this internationally funded and internationally guided soft sector of ideas, perception, and ideologies has been pulling a lot of creative people, because working in that sector, it brought you not only like basic means to live normally, but it was also kind of professionally dignified. Like working in local media, privately owned or state owned, you always had this issue of not only professional but even personal risk of being endangered, of being put in situations you really don't like to experience like a human being. But working in foreign funded media, you didn't have that, especially on journalist level. Like maybe editors and CEOs organizations do have to deal with donors and so on, but the donors, and I really want to emphasize that, they never pushed local media to be unprofessional. So I think this sector and the whole civil society, non-profit sector, a lot of think tanks, organizations have actually been taking away these creative, young, energetic people that didn't have any alternative space. You didn't have any grassroots, locally financed civil society, democratization, human rights, or media initiatives. So one of my first conditions for myself was, we are not gonna take foreign money. Not because we believe that some of these countries want to have some kind of malign influence. Some of their influences are in accordance with our strategic goals. But basically, when someone is giving you money, it's professional, it's like honest to do what they expect you to do. And sometimes our interests, Bosniak interests of this state, are not going to be aligned with the interests of Sweden, with the interests of United Kingdom and US, which we really experienced in some 3 or 4 years ago with this constitutional and electoral changes. So, but I also believe that this is some kind of generational shift. Bosnia, we have to frame Bosnia as a young democracy, because this is the first 3 decades of however weak, however internationally limited, it is still a democracy with relatively fair elections and a lot of freedom of speech and a lot of freedom of identity, freedom of any kinds. And I think also it's the moment for something like that to happen.
It's very interesting you say that, and I'm quite intrigued by this narrative that you have. And I mean, as you know, we both know, and I even expect many of the listeners will know, criticisms of donor communities in developing democracies, new democracies. I mean, this is very well known, right? Like this is not new. But I think one of the interesting things that you alert us to is the way in which even, kind of, even without necessarily imposing an agenda, just the kind of economic interests are such that where, as you say, you want to work in a stable environment, you want to work in a professional environment, that really is a particular factor in all of this that I think has been not adequately explored. And so I'm quite interested, in this idea of essentially, what is the role of private capital in these new democracies that is local in beginning to foster some of these intellectual initiatives? I mean, are you kind of hopeful that there is a, to use a very Marxist term, is there an enlightenment happening among the Bosnian bourgeoisie that maybe will benefit not just Odgovor, but many other initiatives that are going to be local and really grassroots?
Yeah, there's plenty of great ideas in broadly speaking in the civil society sector, and there is significant Bosnian and Bosniak affiliated capital. When I say Bosniak affiliated, it means that those are people that Bosnia is their destiny. Some of these companies are non-existent if this country or part of this country becomes, part of some other regional country or heavily influenced institutionally by some other countries. But unfortunately, while preparing the project, I was hopeful that I will find more people than I actually found. And one of the takes from this process is that we need some kind of, basically we need time, because you have a lot of people that have money, that have really viable businesses, that have really strong businesses, and they are very corporate in running their businesses. But speaking of all these soft powers and responsibility to their society, they are stuck on charity level. And some of them actually are politically illiterate. Some of them actually do not understand when someone imposes non-working Sunday for shopping centers in one part of Bosnia, that it's gonna influence disproportionately the economy of the country. But I'm really hopeful that because Bosniaks have issue with elites, like we have all these generational cuts in elites, like every 30 to 50 years there is no opportunity for Bosniak elite to transfer knowledge, to transfer sense of identity, the sense of belonging, the sense of responsibility. So this is like some 3 decades of peace. It's basically it's a stable peace. This is peaceful country. You don't have incidents. You don't have there's a lot of tension in public space and politics.
Sure.
Yeah, but I believe that also there is a need for generational shift. Like sons need to take both jobs, the narrative, and so on. Of course, figuratively speaking, sons still have to listen to fathers when they are speaking to them strategically and transferring their wisdom, but operationally exploring new spaces, exploring new possibilities of thinking, first of all, new possibilities and new avenues of thinking and new possibilities of cooperation, both within the country, within the region, within the Europe, and so on. I believe we must be a bit more creative and more bold.
So I was just visiting my family in Vancouver, BC, where my parents lived. That's where my family ended up settling after the war. And you talk about this idea of, essentially no generational transfer or very little generational transfer between, say people our age, and you and I are about a year or two apart, whatever, our parents, their grandparents, blah, blah, blah. And, I was talking to my parents about our family history, and on both my mom and dad's side, we actually, maybe a little bit unusual for Bosnians, we have small families and also families that were just very interrupted. And I realized in talking to them, as best as I can tell, going back at least 5 generations, every single one of my ancestors on both my father's and mother's side had either been expelled or had experienced war, or, in one case, literally dug themselves out of a mass grave in the 1940s. And so, that really, I think, resonates. And I think sometimes foreigners, for lack of a better term, don't understand how much generational interruption has taken place in Bosnia specifically, and I would say perhaps not exclusively, but I would say in particular among the Bosniak community. So much so that even today, when for all its flaws, for all its problems, Dayton-era Bosnia is providing a certain kind of stability that is allowing for certain kinds of intellectual and market-based programs and solutions and operations to take place for the first time in like 2 centuries.
Yeah, because the Dayton Bosnia is the first constitutional state, institutional social framework for Bosniaks, meaning Bosnian Muslims, that they are not structurally limited in their social, intellectual, and political improvement. Like, this is the first time in the history of country that something cannot happen if Bosniaks don't want to. Like, this is not our national state. We cannot do whatever we want, but others cannot do whatever they want if we don't want to. This is the first time it's happening. And I believe that this kind of consciousness needs to take roots within the new generation, because there is a lot of trauma, there is a lot of fear among people. Like, if you speak up, if you try something bad is going to happen. For example, my family fortunately didn't have the history like yours and like many families, especially in eastern and some western parts of the country. I'm from central Bosnia. We are stuck between those hills, and like no one cannot do anything to us. Even the Hungarians in the medieval age. But we have been limited. That's like another issue. You are limited. You cannot go to proper schools. You don't have normal roads. Like, for 10 kilometers, you have school that's only first 4 grades. You have to go to another city, and so on and so on. So I believe that Bosniaks have been deprived of many things that Serbs and Croats in various parts, that's also relative, like Croats in some parts of this country had also some systemic disadvantages. But I believe this is the time when we do have this freedom, and like every freedom, many people don't know what to do with that freedom. So I believe Bosniaks need to grow up a little bit. It maybe sounds condescending, but being a Bosniak at the eve of 40s, I dare to say something like that. We really need to grow up. We need to take responsibility for our country, for our relations both within the country and with other countries, which is also another Dayton-induced structural anomaly that foreigners, especially United States, international community through Office of the High Representative, has been heavily involved in state building. I wouldn't call that nation building, it's actually state building in the first Dayton decade, like till 2005, 2006. So basically, one generation of Bosniak political and intellectual elite realized that we don't have to do that. Like, Americans are gonna do that. Because during this first decade, like, Americans have been imposing things that have been really good for Bosniaks and for a stronger state. And stronger state means something positive for Bosniaks. And then international order starts to change, relations start to change. Russia is getting stronger in the second half of the first decade of this century. So this generation of Bosniak, this boomer generation of Bosniak political elite, found themselves lost. Like, they cannot outsource state building anymore. Like, Biden is not gonna come and save the country. On the contrary, his ambassadors and his mid officials will broker some deals that are not constructive in state building. So I believe that Bosniaks need to grow up, need to realize that they do have agency, but they have to start acting on it.
So, I mean, first and foremost, I agree with you completely. I mean, I've often used that sense of political illiteracy as being a major phenomenon among, I think, the Bosniak community in particular, unfortunately. Based on some of my conversations with, I will say, at least the current cohort of ambassadors in Sarajevo and also the region more broadly, I suspect that your appeal for Bosniaks and perhaps maybe folks in the Balkans in general to grow up will find a receptive audience among many of them. So I think that's good that there's agreement. But I want to use this opportunity to also pivot a little bit. So we've kind of had a reflection, let's say a philosophical conversation, which I think is very important. This year in particular, towards the end of this year, we're going to have another round of general elections in Bosnia-Herzegovina. It's been a very tumultuous few years since the last elections in 2022, not just because of the interventions of the High Representative. We've had, significant global events that have taken place. Obviously, the election in the United States. Now we have the war in the Persian Gulf. It's unclear what is the direction of the EU. How do you, at this vantage point right now, it's the end of March. It's going to be October, November that we'll be looking at the elections. What do you think sort of the major stories going into the 2026 general elections in Bosnia are?
It's kind of hard to tell, actually. I've been dealing with elections and all these pre-electoral atmosphere and narratives daily, but still it's difficult to grasp and realize what are going to be main directions. Like, first of all, I think that one of the most interesting battles is gonna be happening in Republika Srpska, in the RS, which is the part of the entity within the country dominated by Serbs and run by Milorad Dodik, this well-known figure both in local and to some extent in international politics. This was basically the guy who is and still is heavily influenced by Russia. He's been sanctioned by US. And he managed, with the help of heavy lobbying in the United States, to get all of these sanctions lifted. And now he has some doors open in the DC, especially among these, let's say, radical Christian factions within the Republican establishment. So basically now he seems kind like a small Aleksandar Vučić, which is the president of Serbia, who is always being accused or described as someone who is sitting on two chairs, like Russian and Western chair. I believe that Dodik is trying to do the same. He has been he's been eager secessionist for all of these years, but I believe that this went down, especially because he's been sentenced by the state court and he had to acknowledge this state and the state judiciary. But opposition in the Republika Srpska, they had these special elections because Dodik was dismissed as president of Republika Srpska, and they had to have these snap elections. The opposition candidate actually almost won, which is really totally was being unthinkable some months ago. And I believe that this is gonna be one of the harshest battles, and I would like the opposition in RS to win, not because I hate Dodik or something like that, because this is democracy and people in Republika Srpska and all of the citizens of this country need some kind of change, because Dodik is he's here for like 25 years at least at the top levels. I think he never lost power in the Republika Srpska entity government, and he is almost always on the state level. I think because every change brings something different, and I believe this opposition can bring something different, because their candidate for president was almost totally anonymous medical doctor from Banja Luka, which is the biggest city there. And his narrative was like he's from Naša stranka from Sarajevo. He sounded like that. He sounded like Naša stranka candidate. And he went to all of these Serbs and he was candidate of the SDS, Serb Democratic Party, which was funded by Radovan Karadzic. So he goes like a candidate of SDS, and he speaks like official from Naša Stranka, and he gets almost the same number of votes as Milorad Dodik. What does that tells us? It tells us that there is a lot of people in Republika Srpska that are fed with this destructive, impossible secessionist strategy. The second biggest battle is going to be for top position for Bosniaks in the state presidency, which basically goes down to all the levels of political power. It's going to be battle between incumbent member of the presidency, Denis Bećirović. He has support of his native SDP and some other 11 parties, which they are a very, very colorful group united by ambition to win over SDA, which is the biggest Bosniak party. And Bećirović already stated that he's gonna be running for another mandate, but there is no candidate from other side. Although presidency is totally limited in Bosnia, they have really narrow executive powers. It's only like appointing a state prime minister, some role in state budget, and appointing ambassadors and deciding on armed forces. Still, it has really huge symbolical powers also. And this ability of presidency to influence the formation of state council of minister, it also goes down because parties then can blackmail each other. If you don't give me something on the state level, I'm not going to participate on the entity level, and so on and so on. So this is going to be a huge battle, but I don't agree with some of our commentators and pundits and officials who are trying to make impression that these elections are some kind of referendum on I don't know what. I believe these are going to be proper elections. I hope also they are trying to introduce some kind of modern technologies in ballot counting and so on. What is more important for me is the entity level governments, because we are entering a time where dealing with some more tangible issues than identity and constitution is going to be really important, like energy, oil, prices, inflation, loans, debts, and so on. So I believe this is really important for not only for Bosnians but for all citizens to have better federal government, the government of entity of federation.
So, you're talking about Blanusha earlier, which was the SDS candidate for the RS elections, and I was reminded of the fact that Radovan Karadzic, the architect of the genocide in Bosnia, once upon a time was involved with the Green Party. There's a history here. More seriously, I think you raise a couple interesting points that I want to follow up on. And I think the sort of the specific one is, you raise this idea of hopefully the next elections and the successive or subsequent, I should say, rather, governments will be a little bit more focused on, what in America you would call bread and butter issues, inflation, cost of living, jobs, all of that good stuff. Do you feel, as the local voice, which you don't want to be,
I don't want to be local in this podcast.
But I mean, it's something that I spent probably about a third or a quarter of the year in Bosnia, give or take, but I'm still, primarily outside of the country. But it means that when I come back, I get to see maybe some changes that somebody who's living there every day doesn't necessarily notice as much, right?
That's really
even down to the banal
good perspective level.
Yeah. So I feel like, and my wife, who is not Bosnian but has been coming to Bosnia for the better part of 15 years, she and I both agree that Bosnia seems to be, in almost every sense, becoming a more prosperous, economically well-off society. Of course, there are issues. No, it's not equally distributed. There's a growing sort of rich-poor chasm. All of that is valid. Do you feel like it is becoming more politically profitable for some politicians to say, like, no, actually, I want to talk about jobs. I don't want to talk about Serbs, Bosniaks, Croats, Dayton, the war. I want to talk about, credit ratings and jobs. Do you feel that? Is that something that you would agree with or no?
Actually, there has always been this type of politics and narratives, like war is over, let's turn to economics. So this kind of joke, and like genocide is over, let's turn over to economics, and so on and so on. Almost every party has something to say in that. Like when something is happening, almost every party is running to have their say in these issues. But I think it's more important who is gonna be dealing with these issues. Like, I think we have a HR crisis in governance. Like, every year by year, you see some really incompetent people in governing bodies. Like, not in parliaments. Anyone can be elected. This is democracy. Everyone can be elected if you have enough energy, appeal, and so on and so on. But appointed officials like ministers, state secretaries, deputy ministers, CEOs of public state-owned companies, which are really important here, because public sector in Bosnia employs almost half of all employees in the country. I believe we have some kind of crisis of governance, of quality of governance here, which I cannot grasp all the roots of it. But my advice to all these political parties that are now in opposition is, like, if you want to have some kind of success, if you want to stay here after 2 or 4 years, if you don't want your coalition to fall apart after a couple of months, find better people. Like, beg some good guys in governance, some good guys in economics, some good guys in military industry, I don't know, and so on and so on. But this is also the issue of growing private sector, because private sector is pulling quality people and they can offer them something much better. Like the state sector was the best employer maybe some 20 years or 15 years ago, but now it's not. And you have to find some other layer of incentives for quality people, for professionals, for people which are both professional, have character, and have sense of belonging to society. You have to find some kind of more sophisticated incentives than salary or influence and so on. So this is my advice to all political parties, because they will get a crisis within the society that can be much more dangerous than the constitutional crisis. They will be endangered by all this spectrum of weird populistic one-man show political parties, because Bosnian electoral system is such, it has so many electoral units and a very low threshold of 3%. So basically you can have around 3,000 votes and be interior minister, which is a really, really important position. So these guys, like this interior minister, which is really a peculiar figure, very interesting one actually, I'm also influenced by this culture of reals politics, you know. Yeah. And if I am influenced by that, so we can imagine how some people who are not in the profession, who are not in this industry. So I believe my advice is to big political parties, which are SDA, SDP, Bosniak Social Democrats, and Croat Democratic Union, is to start to look for more quality people that represent them, that they are that push their agenda and that work on their behalf. Because if the country is getting prosperous, people have much more sophisticated demands. You cannot satisfy them with the basics anymore.
That's right. Yeah. As much as I would like to spend the rest of this podcast talking about Ramo Isak, who I think is the single worst thing that's happened to Bosnia since the war. That's my claim.
No. You're too harsh on him.
You're too harsh on Ramo. Well, we'll agree to disagree, but I do want to pivot here a little bit. We've been talking about Bosnian elections, and I want to talk about for a minute now one of the supposed good news stories in the Western Balkans, which is Slovenia. Slovenia is usually held up as kind of the most successful of the Western Balkan countries. So successful, actually, that often they're not even included in the Western Balkans. I mean, you're old enough to remember that definition of the Western Balkans, which was the former Yugoslavia minus Slovenia plus Albania, which I always thought was a fantastic claim. Anyway, so they just had elections, and the results are very close. But I kind of want to ask you specifically about one person there, which is this guy. Janša, right? Janez Janša, Janez Janša, who's been a figure in Slovenian politics longer than Dodik, right? I mean, basically since the late 80s.
Yeah,
exactly, since the late 80s. What does that say to us about Slovenian and perhaps Balkan politics? How is it that some of these figures have been able to stick around for 40 years and still, I mean, absurdly in the case of Janša, sell himself as a kind of like populist, upstart, man of the people? The guy's been prime minister 3 times, and he's still supposedly a man of the people.
We usually don't like this kind of guys, but we really have to admit that they are there for so long because they are good at what they are doing. Like when you speak with people that cooperated with Dodik, that have been on meetings with him, which is really weird. They say he gets his glasses, he gets his notes, and he writes down and listens everything, and his questions are so substantial that everyone is surprised. He's good at his job. He's diligent. He's committed, and we have to accept that bad guys are good at their job. So Janša is there, like, and Dodik is also he also started politics. Dragan Čović was also involved in politics in the late 80s. But somehow I feel like it's time to Slovenia to feel a bit Balkanish again. So they are basically currently they experience situations like Bosnia experiences every 3 or 4 years. It's hard for them to form a government. So for us it's like daily business because they have more parties in the parliament. They have parties with 2, 3, 5, 7 seats, and they have these 2 major parties with around 25 to 30 seats. So no one has majority, and now they have to negotiate, and now Slovenia has to find some kind of their own Ramo Isak. Yeah. But yeah, because with the media industry changing and the perception of society changing via social media, it's easier for showmans and for weird, interesting, clickable guys to enter politics and get votes. So this is happening all across Europe. I'm not gonna comment on Donald Trump and United States because sure. I'm local. I'm not gonna comment on your local issues. This is also happening at some extent in Italy, in Netherlands as well. Because like you always had in Europe, like in the United States, these blocks, like 2 to 3 blocks. In Germany, you have this great coalition and so on and so on. But this is changing, and this is also I have to get back to this. My advice to the Bosnian biggest political parties: you have to work harder because these smaller players are getting into the game. Some guy like Ramo Isak gets into the game with 3,000 votes, then he gets all this infrastructure and he gets the influence, he gets the possibility to create his own clientelistic network, then he gets 10,000 votes, and next term he gets 50,000 votes. So Slovenia is really good example, like a totally stable country, really great economic development, small enough to be compact, to be well organized, joining EU, joining NATO, having relatively good relations with neighbors, except with Croatia and this border dispute, but still at the end they have really good peaceful relations. They also have this notable international politics when they have been for recognizing Palestine and so on. I want to emphasize that because they have this opportunity and position to have authentic independent politics on international scene. But still, something is happening with democracy in Western world, and there are some ruptures, there are some peculiar new phenomena, and Slovenia is getting Balkanized. I'm sorry for them. They have been for a long time watching us and maybe sometimes preaching us how to do. And Janša is also part of this, I'm gonna call it axis of destruction, international axis of destruction, of destructive politics, which is Viktor Orban, Hungarian Prime Minister, Milorad Dodik in Bosnia, and also at the top of this axis of destruction now is Benjamin Netanyahu, who's starting his, how to put it, Eastern Central European politics. He's kind of creating this axis across the Greece with Milorad Dodik, Viktor Orban, and Janez Janša, and some Israeli private intelligence companies have been involved in preparing elections in Slovenia. So this also tells us that Europe has some kind of political and ideological holes that actors not seen before are trying to fill, because Israel dealing with European politics in such a manner, like inviting Milorad Dodik to Knesset and so on, inviting Edi Rama to award him and so on. I believe this is something quite new, and this is something EU also has to think about.
Yeah, and then of course we have obviously the Russian factor, I mean, which is huge in this entire dynamic. But I mean, I take the point that we are, and we're certainly not the first ones to have this observation, right? That there is a kind of global right-wing anti-liberal coalition. People even go so far as to include Modi's India in some of these configurations. India doesn't have a major footprint in Bosnia or the Balkans, but this is a kind of I was going to say this is like a dark globalization, right? So on that very optimistic note, we've been talking for just about an hour. I'm gonna wrap us up here. I know time flies when you're depressed. Kenan, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate your perspective. Hopefully you will be joining us again sooner rather than later. Hopefully. And then we'll pick up the conversation from there.
Thank you, Jasmin, for the opportunity, and I hope this is going to be useful for the folks interested in Bosnia and Western Balkans.
I have no doubt, or at least we'll drive them to drinking. So, it's either or. All right, take care. Thank you very much.
Thank you. See you.